Welcome to Doc's Lab and our third Master Series. Welcome to Doc's Lab and our third Master Series. I do believe this is the 8th video on production engineering and the 4th video on production tools. And in this video, we want to talk about our D.A.Ws, their role and importance as production engineers. So the first thing that I want to state right away is that we're talking about becoming a production engineer. We've already talked a lot about becoming an audio engineer, and we want to focus on what is really great about D.A.Ws that we utilize as production engineers, so that our job ends as a production engineer unless we are the actual audio engineer at the time that we've got a good performance captured. Then it goes to the audio engineer, or at the time of the capture. So we're going to be looking at the things that are great for us as production engineers that can make our job much simpler and to help us do our job much better. So let's take a look at our D.A.Ws. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at when we take our D.A.Ws into consideration as production engineers is that it gives us a look into the world of the audio engineer. The things that he's going to be focused on or she's going to be focused on when working on our beautiful masterpiece productions. And, you know, we talked a lot about some of the most important things is get a really good capture of a really good performance, of a really good production. And besides that, the things that the audio engineer is going to be looking at. So we get to look inside their world as we're putting things together to go, what's the audio engineer going to be concerned with? He's going to be concerned about things being clean. He's going to be concerned about equalization. He's going to be concerned about spatialization. He's going to really be concerned about the sound sculpting, how well things sound in the capture, and what he has to do to make it sound better when he's enhancing things or fixing things and things like that. And the most primary things that we need to focus on, so that as production engineers, that we focus on those areas, making sure those areas are done as well as possible to make the audio engineer's job easier, so that he can enhance what we give him to make it as good as possible. So that's one of the biggest things that we have with our D.A.Ws as production engineers, to give us a look into that, so that we can take all these things into consideration that he or she would be addressing when engineering our productions. So the more we understand about what the audio engineering will be focused on, that we can pre-focus on that, so that when we go to get those really good captures of those really good performances of those great productions that we've put together as production engineers, that those things have been really taken into consideration and thought about, that I've talked about a lot in my first couple master series and all over on my channel, so that those things are addressed as well as possible, so that the audio engineer doesn't have to spend as much time fixing things and repairing things and things like that, and can really work on enhancing our production. So it's the first biggest thing that we have with our D.A.Ws, to be able to look into the audio engineer's world, so that we can take into considerations the things that they will be taking into consideration to make our productions as good as possible. So familiarizing ourselves as much as possible with the D.A.Ws and what the audio engineer will be doing with our wonderful captures of our great performances, of our great productions, is an invaluable tool to us as production engineers, and we need to take full advantage of that. So that is the first thing that we have with our D.A.Ws, is being able to see inside the audio engineer's world. Now let's take a look at the next thing we have with our D.A.Ws. Okay, the first thing is, as we think about all the things that we've talked about so far as tools, being our instruments, our theory, and our written music, besides all the other things we've talked about so far that we're really working on perfecting and working on, is that the DAW is very helpful in the way that as we're working these things out, we can get out our sheet music. As we're working out our theory on our head and our instruments, we can take captures of it and see how it's going. We can work things out. Sometimes it looks a little dry on sheet music to where, you know, you don't see all the articulations, the feelings and emotions sometimes till you get pretty good at notating it, you know, but the basics are really what you're looking for at first, you know, just so you got the basic understanding of what's going on. As you're building chordal structures, progressions, melody lines that go with it, you know, lead lines, you're looking at, you know, percussion lines and bass lines that are working with them, harmonies, and all this stuff as it starts to build together. And you can take little teeny short sections as you're building this, besides wanting to hear it in the DAW, to see how it's actually working together, so that you can take little sections as you start to build and get into your DAW, have a rough draft folder and a song folder that the rough drafts just get it laid out like, you know, like a scratch pad. And that way you can just record that. You can record the basics of the vocals there and the backing vocals, the guitar, the lead, melody line, the bass line, no matter how many instruments you might have in that section, because there can be tons. But you break it down into smaller sections, like, you know, the first measure of the intro. Does that make sense? And you can really fine tune what's going on there in your rough draft folder to really hear how it's going. And not only that, you actually hear it more lifelike, because as you build it with the things we've talked about and you really want to hear how that one measure sounds, and you get in there, you've got your instruments all laid out, and you're going to be plump the bass line, play the guitar a little bit, and then you know what the expressions you think are going to be there, a rough idea of it, to start hearing it, so to see how it sounds, so that, you know, if sometimes one measure at a time or a half a measure at a time, or, you know, just the verse, and then work on the chorus, all the instruments in those sections, that you can build these rough drafts that are so cool that you can just go through and really fine tune, you know, what you're doing in there, so you can jump back between that and your sheet music and go, well, yeah, but in reality, when I hit this chord here, it's holding, and I'm really cutting it off there. I'm adding more vibrato to it. I've thought about it. I want to add some more. Does that open up anything for something? Is that riding over anything else that I see going on there? Is it causing a problem? I decided to do that just a little bit different now that I hear how it sounds. And then I go back really quick, you know, and record it, you know, play it just a little differently. The guitar's hitting right before this chorus gets in there, you know, yeah, you know, right there. Is that cool? Is that what I want to do? And you can really, between the two of them, you know, bring your production to life from the using your instruments, getting really proficient with them, getting really proficient with your basic theory, your written music, and this wonderful tool is the first big thing that we have in the DAW, because then it opens up a whole new world. It's like written music only auditorily, that we all know as producers, anybody that's seen a DAW, which most of you have, that it's cool, but it lacks the visual side. So, you know, we have the written music to fall back on to double check things. Was that really what I want? There's a lot of stuff going on here. Let's say I got 6 more instruments. There's a lot of things happening. You know, yeah, you know, and you're like, well, is that really, that timing, is that really working well? You know, I know it looks okay, but I'm not really sure. So I'm getting in here and, you know, play it. Bump, bump, bump. You know, whatever you got going on there, that even just half measure at a time, one measure at a time, you know, and get it down to where that rough draft is good to go. It's like, yeah, on written music it looks good. The rough draft folder looks good for that measure there, or that intro or whatever, good to go. That's basically what I want. I had to work on my performance a little bit, but that's basically what I got. And I've checked some of my expression and stuff that I want to do. All the little nuances that make a really good production, you can just do a rough draft of and see how it's working with your written music, checking your theory, checking your fluency of using your instruments. Is really when I use those articulations, is that going to work really well with that type of instrument, with the shaker or with the snare hitting like that, da 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 da. Because I'm really microanalyzing all my instruments and how I'm utilizing them to be a good producer and do things well. And sometimes you work at things, on a piece of sheet music that, good composers, they have to spend I don't know how long on one measure with all the instruments. They maybe have tons of instruments there. And even if they don't, they really spend a lot of time on that one measure. Got to be just right. So it sounds great, bro. I mean, it's put together and built well. All the articulations, all the little nuances, the dynamics, the composition itself, the theory, everything is put together well. And then you go in here and check it. It might change your mind when you get in there and start recording. You go, yeah, but I don't know, maybe that, I don't really want the guitar in there. I changed my mind. I want a pad synth. Bah, bah. I don't know. It doesn't really sound quite right. Now I got to, set up my guitar well and really see how it's actually working with it, make notes of it, what I use and all that stuff. It's a great place as you're building on your sheet music and your theory and your mind and with your instrument. The DAW helps you do that immensely. It's a huge tool to help you do that. Just one step at a time, one moment in time to the next moment in time, and really being able to check, everything in one measure. This is like two measures. It's two measures. 2.5 measures, and it's like that small amount of time I'm going through and making sure that all the instruments now in the rough draft that it's laid out well, checking it against music, checking it there, checking to see if those are the right instruments or I'm using the right configurations, and I'm using my expressions, articulations well, and and everything is working really well together. Then I move on to the next section, go into the music or in the DAW and start either way working out the next verse, or the next the next measure or the next part, say verse or chorus or whatever I'm working on. And it's great for that because it really makes you microanalyze what you're doing and makes you build everything really well and do a good job. Don't do things you can't do. That means if you want Yngwie Malmsteen to play your lead here, but you are not able to do it, don't write it like that because you can't perform it. Do something you can do and make sure it's going to work well and that you can perform it well so it comes out sounding good. You might only go da 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 pow ba da 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 da, and it's not that complicated. It's not that you just cannot do unless you do it on a synthesizer with MIDI or something that is going to take a little while for you to work out. Do things you can do and stay within your abilities so that you do even simple things really well and do with which is in your abilities well. And it really helps you to microanalyze that, working with your sheet music, working your mind with your theory and working with your instrument. Then you get out your keyboard and you can use all kinds of different instruments to check it, to check how chord progressions are working together with melody lines and really hear how well it actually sounds working together. Does that make sense? And checking everything, to make sure everything, this rough draft folder you got going on, that everything in every section, whether it's all the way down to a half measure or a measure, one measure at a time or one section at a time, a chorus, bridge, whatever, that everything's done real well before you move to the next section, because it'll help you as you move through the production that you can really see, well, I know I did the intro like that, and that's kind of the motif of what's happening with the sound of it. So I don't have to spend so much time in the verse because I don't have to change that much. It's just that the music's a little bit different. I might have added a shaker or a timbali or something, that I have to take into consideration as I'm working it out on the paper, in my mind, on my instrument, and inside the DAW, getting this rough draft recording to really help you go through, and do a really good job of building it. So that when it's go time, you're going to go for your actual song and you open up your song folder for that you can really practice on your performances and you got the rough draft down good and you don't have no questions about that. You're just going to work it out and make sure your performances are really good. You've using the right instruments for what you want to do, and then get those great captures. So that's the first huge tool we have with the DAW that can really help us. And it's like written music, only auditorily, because we can't really see the music. All we can do is hear it. So, but it's huge, and it can really help us fine tune our performances, our compositions, and make sure that everything's arranged and built well, before we go into the actual go time. You get those really good captures so that it's built really well and put together really well so that we have good stuff to work with. And it's our first biggest tool in the DAW. So let's take a look at the next thing we like in our DAW. Okay, so this is the first part of our look at DAWs, and we'll continue in the next video. So peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed this next video on our third master series, and I will see you again in just a moment.